And we are right at the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Ferreira, Director of Education here at the FSHD Society, and I am joined today by the Managing Director of the Global FSHD Innovation Hub, Amanda Rickard, and we are really excited to have her share with us a little bit about the FSHD Global Innovation Hub and what that means for the community. Before we begin, just a quick reminder, this session will be recorded, so you will be able to go back to it later on. And if you have any questions during our presentation, please make sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. It helps us manage the questions a little bit easier. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Ashley. Wonderful. It's great to have the opportunity to share the work that we're doing at the Hub and give you a bit of background on all the progress that we've made so far. So I'm Amanda Rickard. As Ashley said, I'm the Managing Director of the Hub. The Hub is an arm of the FSHD Society that's focused on providing resources and support to companies that are either currently developing therapies for FSHD or interested in doing so. And so I thought I would start out this seminar with a little bit of introduction to myself and my background. I'm going to go to the next slide to do that. And I found some very old photos, which is maybe a little embarrassing, but I thought would help you follow along on my journey. So I started out my career about 15 years ago as an academic researcher at the University of Washington's Institute for Stem Cell and Regenerative Medicine. You can see pictures of me in my lab at the top left here. And I was really fortunate because the principal investigator that I was working with is on the left there, Dan Miller. He's both an MD and a PhD, so he's running a lab while also running a medical genetics clinic. And the reason that was so fortunate for me is that he had the foresight to bring FSHD patients into our lab and introduce us to them, let them look down our microscopes and ask us questions. And that really launched kind of a passion for me in kind of bridging the gap between the scientific research that I was doing and the patient community and really seeing, the impact that the work that we were doing could have. And so I worked at the University of Washington publishing papers, as you would expect. We studied the mechanisms of FSHD in cells in a dish. We developed models of FSHD that could be used for drug screening. And we also did work on trying to figure out the genes that cause FSHD, because at that time when I first started, those things weren't yet described, which is kind of amazing to think about. So I was really fortunate to be involved in that research. And at the same time, like I said, got involved in patient advocacy, joined the MDA's FSHD support group in the Seattle area, also joined the Friends of FSH research group as a board member and a scientific advisory board member. So you can see in the middle a picture of my husband and I at the Friends auction, which that picture was probably taken in like 2014. And continued my work both on the science side and on the patient advocacy side. I moved then to San Diego and led the FSHD drug development program at a company called Genea Biocells. That's me in the top right in the lab coat. Obviously, that's like a marketing photo that they took for the website because scientists don't normally, hold things above their heads like that. But I was really fortunate in San Diego also to be connected there with the San Diego chapter of the FSHD Society. Anyone who knows Amy Beckier knows that you can't sit too close to her without being recruited to work on some kind of FSHD related initiative. And I was really thankful for that. And I got the chance also to inspire my students to do patient advocacy work in San Diego as well. I got to volunteer and build a variety of fundraisers and events and got to speak for a couple of years at the Society's Ghostly Gala in LA. That's a picture of me at the bottom left with my family, my little infant son at that time, as a guest at that Ghostly Gala as a speaker. So continued the trajectory of my career. I left Genea and worked at Pfizer in their epigenetics group, working on a molecule that's now in phase 3 trials for breast cancer. Continued my FSHD work in the background and also was an advisor for their rare disease program, which included FSHD research. I moved on from my role as a scientist at the bench to work on the corporate development team at a company called Notch Therapeutics. And there was really responsible for partnerships and technology licensing and kind of built business chops as I continued my career. And then earlier this year in April, I joined the FSHD Society as the director of the Global FSHD Innovation Hub. Bottom right is a picture of me at the first event that I attended after joining the society, and that little kiddo who's holding the banner there is the same kid that you see on the left page. So suffice to say that although I don't have FSHD in my family is very well versed on the disease, and even my son can tell you all about it. So I thought it would be fun to share my journey. There are many folks who have, mentored me and I've worked with along the way, and I've been involved with the FSHD Society for a long time, and look forward to kind of using all of these different pieces of my background to support FSHD drug developers. And so as far as the Innovation Hub and kind of its purpose and its goals, if I sort of walk through the name left to right for you, so the Innovation Hub is global because it serves, the worldwide patient population of nearly 1 million people who are affected by FSHD and who are motivated and interested in safe and effective and accessible therapies. We, as the Innovation Hub, build tools and deploy resources on a global scale to help developers meet this need. And that's really our mission is, as you can see, accelerating the development of FSHD therapeutics and getting treatments to patients faster. We are the world's only innovation platform of our kind, focused solely on FSHD, and we're formed from deep expertise within our team and with our collaborators and partners. And, the FSHD Society has a long history of being engaged with researchers and with those who are developing therapies for FSHD. And it was time, because of the kind of status of the pipeline of FSHD therapies that are coming, to formalize that in a way that gives drug developers a clear place to go when they need that type of support. Innovation's in our name because accelerating successful clinical trials and drug approvals requires that we understand what the field has learned and use that to build new tools and approaches for the future, which is what we're focused on doing. And we're a hub because we marshal and direct data and projects and input and partners and resources from a variety of sources to accelerate and improve therapies. And I think that the society and the hub together bring a uniquely informed perspective that's shaped by years of experience working across the landscape. And we also have this unique ability to learn from and apply the learnings from patients to make sure that that voice is really clearly heard in all of the FSHD programs that we work in. So I'm sure the folks on attending this already know, but there is a growing number of treatments in development for FSHD. And this list is pretty spectacular if you consider what I said earlier, which was at the beginning of my career, we were publishing papers on trying to figure out the genes that were responsible for FSHD. You can see that there are therapies that range all the way from the early research stage, which is where companies are just coming up with the ideas for the types of therapies they could develop. They're thinking, how could the technology that we have and the expertise that we have be used to make an effective FSHD drug? They're doing work in the petri dishes, like I was describing earlier, and also in animal studies to test whether or not the hypothesis that they've come up with moves the needle in a way that allows them to put together a data package, which is the required next step, and that data package has to be submitted to regulators for them to have permission to test their therapy in clinical trials. You can see we also have therapies here that are in the early stage clinical trials. In phase 1 trials, mostly the goal there is to test the safety of a drug, and we do that in a small number of patients to ensure that we understand how the drug is working and understand some of the measures that we can use to see where that drug is going in the body and what effect it might be having. And then as companies sort of move from the left to the right side here, the clinical trials become bigger. And the goal becomes measuring the actual effect of those therapies as it relates to FSHD. How are they working, and what effect are they having on the symptoms of FSHD that patients are experiencing? And all of that data is rolled up into a big data package, including a wide variety of other things like manufacturing details, all of the safety and efficacy data, and the work that companies do to understand how their drug actually works. And that's rolled up into a BLA application to the regulators to get that drug approved and out on the market so that it can be accessed by patients outside of clinical trials. And so the other thing I wanted to point out about this pipeline is that there are a variety of different approaches that are being used as potential treatments for FSHD. There are therapies that work to block DUX4, the toxic element in FSHD muscle. And you can see those that are listed on the left, and there are a wide variety of different approaches to doing that, right? And so some of these clinical trials have things in common with them, with each other, and some of the things that are measured in the trial are different from trial to trial, depending on the type of drug and the mechanism of that drug, how it actually works. And then on the right side, you can see there are also therapeutic programs that are focused on something besides DUX4. These are things like tissue engineering or repair, muscle growth type mechanisms, stem cells, and immune regulation in order to treat FSHD in a slightly different way and understand how each of these mechanisms work in FSHD. And so again, as you can imagine, the things that you measure in a clinical trial that targets DUX4 might be similar or different from the things that you measure in a clinical trial that does not. And so our goal is to really help any and all of these companies accelerate their clinical trials and their potential drug approvals in order to get more access to patients. So we, share the excitement at the progress of the pipeline for FSHD, and we have built the tools and capabilities to be able to help these companies with their work all across the board here. And I did want to point out, if you'd like to take a look at this, because it's kind of a small graphic, it's available on the FSHD Society website. So how do we work to achieve our goals of accelerating therapies for FSHD? As far as what we provide to drug developers, it's a wide variety of things, but I've tried to kind of sum it up here in a couple of bullet points. So we provide FSHD expertise and strategic guidance on their program. We have incredible experts on our team who can fill any gaps that a company feels like they have. If you imagine a really early stage company with only a small group of people working on a drug, they may not have an FSHD expert on their team, for example. And so it's very helpful for them to be able to come to us, and we can provide that background and those resources. We also provide critical data to speed their decision making. And so I'll go in the following slides into a couple of examples of the type of data that we use. But suffice to say that we're a data-driven organization, and that's absolutely necessary in order to be able to speed decision making and also speed the design and execution of clinical trials. We also provide, of course, because of our umbrella organization with the FSHD Society, we provide connections to FSHD registries and patient advisory panels, and give drug developers, really the opportunity to understand what it is that patients care about and help them get their questions answered regarding the way that they're designing their drugs, the way that they're designing their trials, or the outcomes that are most impactful for patients. We also run collaborations and research projects that are focused on improving clinical trials, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And we offer support for actually running the clinical trials themselves for organizations that can use that. So a wide variety of ways that we work to help. And I wanted to also make sure that I highlighted why this matters for FSHD families and sort of why that hub was established in the first place. One important thing here is that past learnings from previous trials and previous research can be carried forward to support the programs of today. And I think that's really important to understand, because it means that anyone who participates in research at any stage, whether that's enrolling in a natural history study or donating biopsy material for researchers to use in the lab, or enrolling in a clinical trial or other methods, enrolling in a registry, for example, all of those things can be helpful and are certainly helpful for drug developers in order to be successful. Another reason why this is impactful, and we think that it's important, is that the lower we can bring the risk to a company for developing an FSHD therapeutic, the more investment we see from that company, but also from the field. And we've heard from companies that just having these resources available, smooths the path for those companies. And when they're making decisions about whether or not they want to develop an FSHD drug or not, knowing that they kind of have all of this support backing them and available to them along the way is one of the factors that can spur their investment in that space. Of course, the goal is speeding clinical trials and treatment access. And also, like I said, we're kind of uniquely able to put the patient voice at the forefront in all of the services that we provide to ensure that the drugs that are being developed with patient input. So I wanted to outline some common questions in FSHD research and kind of how we address them at the Hub and how we work to support developers who are trying to answer those questions. So common question is generally, what clinical trials have been run before? What can we learn from those trials to improve or speed our own approach to FSHD? I'm excited to share that we've recently, in the last couple of weeks, launched a clinical data warehouse called Focus, which stands for FSHD Open Collaborative Unified System. And we are very thankful to our partners at Fulcrum Therapeutics, who donated the data from their phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials to make them available to researchers and developers. And so the goal of Focus for us and for folks who can get access to the data is to be able to analyze and understand the FSHD clinical data that currently exists. Like I said, we can harness this data in order to understand what should be done in the future for clinical trials. And our intention for Focus is to continue to grow it in the future and add as many additional data sets as we can. And this model has been used in other diseases before, where having one central location where you can go to access and analyze the data helps you compare what's happened across different clinical trials in the past. And we're learning from those successful models to bring this resource to the community. Another common question for FSHD drug developers and researchers is, how do you design a clinical trial that measures something meaningful? And meaningful has a couple of different definitions here. And also, how will we know if a drug is working, right? One of the initiatives for the Hub that we've launched this year is called the Industry Collaborative. And this is an opportunity for industry members, so the actual companies themselves, as well as a variety of collaborators and partners, to come together to do actual research to understand and improve clinical trial measurements. And so I wanted to walk through a couple of the elements that make what we measure in a clinical trial, what makes us prioritize different measurements, or sometimes we call them endpoints. Of course, we want those endpoints to be relevant to patients. And if we're running a clinical trial and the thing that we're measuring doesn't actually make a meaningful difference in patients' lives, then that drug doesn't have much value to those patients. So that's always at the forefront. We also need a clearly defined protocol so that the different clinical trial sites are measuring the same things in the same ways. And also that protocol can be used from trial to trial so that we can compare data from different trials to understand differences in the results. We want those measures to be reliable. Like I said, that data needs to be consistent, to be interpretable, and also objective. It's better to have a clinical trial measure that isn't based on the opinion of a person, right? And so both of those things can help us make sure that the data is as useful as possible at the end of the trial. We also want good clinical trial measures to be accessible. This has kind of multiple meanings, one being that multiple sites are able to access, for example, the equipment that they would need to measure that thing in a clinical trial, but also that different patients are able to access whatever the process is that they would have to go through in order to be involved in that clinical trial. An example of this is as a kind of a wide example, if you based a clinical trial on how long it takes a patient to run a mile, um, you might have to exclude quite a lot of patients who can't run a mile, right? And so these types of considerations are really important as we think about what we call the recruitment criteria or the inclusion and exclusion criteria for a trial. We want the measures to be measurable in a reasonable amount of time, both for the patient when they're doing their actual clinical visits, but also measurable on a time scale for running a clinical trial. And it takes 5 years for that endpoint to show a difference in patients. That requires that we run that clinical trial for at least 5 years. And connected to that is sensitivity to change. We want a measure that if patients are feeling a functional improvement, that will correlate to a change in a measure on a graph, right? These trial measures have to be accepted by experts and regulators. We want to make sure that this is something that's been well validated, and we want that data to be useful when that company is ready to go to regulators and apply for drug approval if it comes to that point. And so the FSHD Society, of course, does a lot of work in educating and liaising with regulators to help them understand FSHD and the types of clinical trial measures that companies are using and that we are continuing to develop. And so that relationship and that understanding is established before a regulator sees one of those applications. We also sort these endpoints into primary and secondary endpoints. Primary endpoints mean kind of the main thing that you're measuring to see a difference with a drug, while secondary are sort of exploratory. Maybe there's another effect that you want to measure in a patient and see if your drug has made a difference there, but it's not the thing that's going to be used to make the decisions about what happens next in the clinical trial. And then these measures can be either patient reported or clinician reported. And this is important because clinician reported outcome, might involve like a strength test that we can measure, while as a patient reported outcome might be a quality of life measure or a pain measure or something that a patient can report kind of from their day-to-day activities after they've received the treatment. And so both of those are often included in clinical trials to make sure that we're kind of representing as much as possible as far as how patients are feeling after they're treated. And so the areas of focus for the industry collaborative address the challenges that are listed here. So those are the clinical trials for FSHD are often lengthy because they depend on those functional outcome measures, the actual measurements of strength, for example, and those can take a long time to show change. And also because FSHD doesn't progress at a steady rate, it's sometimes hard to predict how long it will take an individual patient to show change with one of those measures. And like I mentioned, only the patients who are able to complete these tasks at the beginning of the trial are able to participate. And so we're working to address these challenges in the industry collaborative research program. Our solutions and the work that we're doing there are working to bridge the gap between, if we zoom all the way into a patient's muscle, the proteins and molecules that are there and how we can measure those things. This could be, for example, doing a blood test to see if there are markers of FSHD in a patient's blood and see if those change through time or with treatment. We also kind of have a middle ground, which is measuring the muscles themselves. And in the industry collaborative, that area of work is focused on imaging-based measures like MRI. So can we, for instance, connect the changes that we're seeing at the protein level with the changes that we're seeing on an MRI image? And if you've attended previous FSHD University webinars, you've heard about the work ongoing in FSHD to understand changes by MRI. And then if we zoom kind of all the way out, we also are connecting those measures with functional measures. This would be things like strength measures or a 6-minute walk run test to understand how these things relate to each other and understand how long it takes to measure changes in patients so that in the future we can shrink down the amount of time that's required to measure whether or not a drug is working in an FSHD clinical trial. And we're doing this by understanding the data that currently exists. Like I said, the Fulcrum dataset is a great start, but there are a wide variety of data sources that we're using in order to run these analyses. We are solving these problems by aligning industry members and the collaborative members on the best approaches for each of these areas of measurements, and also building standardized protocols and what we call assays. So the way we actually measure these things in the lab, so that we can ensure that the data that's being generated in clinical trials is comparable across different clinical trials, but also is reliable. And then I wanted to highlight, the patient-reported outcomes that we mentioned. The society's done a lot of work, and there's been a lot of work done globally to really understand how patients feel about FSHD. And one of the common questions that we get from developers is, how do we learn more about life with FSHD and the effects that patients are feeling day to day and what actually matters to them? So you'll probably be already familiar with the Better Life FSHD platform, which is a patient registry from the FSHD Society. And you'll also know that one of the goals of that registry is to support research. And so from the company side and the researcher side, those organizations can access some of that data through what's called the Better Life FSHD Research Gateway. And that gives them an opportunity to understand some of these patient-reported outcomes, as they're called, and understand the lived experience of people with FSHD so that they can design better treatments and better clinical trials. And so I wanted to make sure that I took a moment to thank you and thank our community for your commitment to FSHD research. Whether you're a researcher or a donor or a participant in clinical trials or natural history studies, or you're enrolled in a registry like Better Life FSHD, if you volunteer, if you support this society and other patient advocacy organizations around the world, all of those things are necessary in order to make it possible for FSHD researchers and therapeutics developers to do their work and to continue to make progress. And so thank you for your commitment to FSHD research, and we hope that you'll continue to do that in the future. And so, just to sum up, the Hub serves as an industry-facing arm of the FSHD Society that's focused on helping drug developers, but we have the aligned mission of bringing better and faster treatments to FSHD families. So maybe I will pause there and see if there are any questions.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Really appreciate that presentation. It was wonderful, and we already do have a few questions. So we'll go ahead and get started with this first one. Rejection rate for a clinical trial, which is very high, is very frustrating for those of us willing to volunteer. Does the Global Innovation Hub help to refine these screenings to admit more volunteers where qualifiers may have been misguided?
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly, I landed on my thank you for participation in research and clinical trials, but that's not always available to some patients, right? Depending on their individual features. And so, one thing I want to sort of step back and think about is that the way that a pharmaceutical company designs a clinical trial is, often aimed at sort of best chance of success, right? And so that includes using the data that we have and the data that exists in the world to understand what can be measured in the amount of time that that pharmaceutical company has to run a clinical trial. And sometimes that's frustrating for patients because the thing that can be measured in that clinical trial might not be something that allows them to enroll in the clinical trial. But the goal overall is to run that trial quickly and kind of as comprehensively as possible to get to the point where a drug can be approved and accessible to patients. And so, I think maybe that information's already known, but I think that maybe some of the frustration can be, quelled by the fact that we have to think about the fact that these are hypotheses that companies are testing, and they're trying to test them as quickly as possible. As far as the work that we do in the hub, so I mentioned, within the industry collaborative, that research organization that we run, one of the goals there is to try to bridge that gap between something like a blood test or a muscle test that shows whether or not a drug is working to the MRI imaging and the functional measures. And so the goal there is not only to speed up clinical trials and make them more sensitive if we can and understand what's happening with the drug better, but it's also that, more patients are going to be eligible to get a blood test than are going to be able to do some of the functional measures that are required in clinical trials, and those trials also take longer. So that is the goal, to be able to help the regulators understand that those different measures can be used in clinical trials to reliably report on progression of FSHD, but also with a further goal of helping drug development companies be able to enroll more patients or more diverse patients in their clinical trials.
Thanks, Amanda. Another question, would getting treatments faster to people, um, would getting treatments to okay, I think what they're trying to say, would it help expedite getting treatments to people faster if we were to expand the age limits in clinical trials, such as above and below, young and old?
Yeah, it's a good question. So would trials run faster if we were able to expand the age limits? I think because this community is so engaged and interested in participating in research, at this moment, with the volume of trials that are going on, the the drug developers have been able to recruit patients for clinical trials readily, right? And that's partly due to the patient advocacy work that happens all over the world. That's partly due to kind of all of the preparation work that our community has done to get ready for clinical trials at this moment. And that's partly a credit to the patients who are paying attention and advocating for themselves to have the opportunity to get involved in clinical trials. So I would say at this moment, uh, there are enough clinical trials to meet the needs of, or sorry, there are enough patients available to meet the needs of drug developers. Whether or not that meets the needs of patients is a different story, right? Many more patients would like to be enrolled in clinical trials, of course. And so, sure, expanding the pool of patients who are enrolling in clinical trials and making the requirements wider, just makes more patients available and makes the job of recruiting those patients for clinical trials perhaps easier. But like I said, one of the goals of running a clinical trial is to have a really well-defined hypothesis about what you think that drug is going to do in the patient population that you're testing it in. And so it's always a balance for drug developers of keeping that pool as wide as possible, but within the kind of confines of knowing that there's a specific question that they're trying to answer.
How can other patient advocacy organizations help the hub and or benefit from it?
Ooh, I love this question. Okay, so um, there are, so first, I think it's just reach out to me and let's chat about what your patient advocacy organization does and what your goals are, and how we can help you as the Innovation Hub, and also how we can help developers understand, the work that you do and maybe the geography that you live in. As everyone knows, running a clinical trial, especially eventually, becomes kind of a global effort for organizations, and they start to recruit patients in multiple countries. And so we have the opportunity, when we're even working really early on with those companies, to help them understand the FSHD landscape, the patient advocacy organizations, and the kind of boots on the ground that exist in these different areas that they're interested in expanding into. And facilitating opportunities to work with those organizations as early as possible. There's also a lot of interest from drug developers and pharmaceutical companies in understanding kind of the diversity of the FSHD experience. And so the more that we can give them the opportunity to understand that and to engage with different patients who live in different healthcare systems, who have, you know, different amounts of access to things like neuromuscular specialists and all of the different uh, opportunities that they have to support their FSHD journey, the better off an FSHD drug developer is, and the more successful they can be if they understand that landscape. So lots of opportunities to work together, and I would encourage anybody who's interested to give me a shout.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Amanda. How can patients and caregivers contribute to the hub? Is it through data, survey, sharing lived experiences, fundraising? How are patients involved with this?
So you already answered the question with that list, right? All of those things are opportunities to contribute to the work that we're doing in the hub and ultimately kind of contribute to the progress in finding an FSHD therapy. Like I said, we're a data-driven organization, and so if patients are able to contribute data, whether that's through enrollment in a registry like Better Life FSHD, whether that's through participation in natural history studies that are ongoing for FSHD, whether that's participation in a clinical trial. Um, all of those things help kind of amass this resource of data that we can pull from in order to design better clinical trials for FSHD, and also help developers understand that the patient community is really engaged and interested in this disease. And I think that's something that really boosts the likelihood of a new company choosing to pursue FSHD in their pipeline, or a company that's been around for a while continuing to invest their resources there, is kind of seeing the community's efforts. Um, you know, also getting involved and volunteering and contributing to the work that the society is doing is incredibly helpful, and continues to kind of build that base of support that we need to be able to provide this type of information to FSHD drug developers. And so I'd say, you know, engaging and advocating for yourself, and also involvement in things like patient advisory boards that actually allow companies to engage with you directly and ask questions, is very helpful to kind of keep that patient voice front and center and give us an opportunity to act as a sort of conduit between those two groups. So overall, I think it's, you know, engaging in whatever way makes the most sense for you and as often as you can, so that we can all work together really to speed up and improve the way that this work is done in FSHD.
Will patients have access to information about ongoing research and trial opportunities connected to the hub?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of joining Better Life is the opportunity to connect with ongoing or currently recruiting clinical trials for FSHD. And so part of the mechanism of the registry there, as an example, is to let you know if there's a clinical trial that's ongoing, that where you have the potential to meet the inclusion or exclusion criteria, and connect you with the resources that you need to learn more about that clinical trial or to talk to your doctor about it. And so I think that that conduit is probably the best way and the best opportunity that we have to connect patients with the trials that are available to them.
Can you expand a little bit more on the global impact that the hub will potentially have versus it just being region specific?
Yeah, so as you all know, the FSHD Society is based in the US, and so our initial efforts in building the hub, you know, have had resources available to us mostly from the US, and now we're working in partnership with a variety of organizations around the world to continue to take kind of that solid base that we've built and expand it to additional countries around the world. I think the other, I mean, we're quite focused on the hub at the support that we can provide to pharmaceutical companies. We know that many of these companies, especially as they get larger, are global companies. Some of them aren't based in the US even, right? But they also have presence around the world. And so it's important for us to be able to engage with them sort of wherever they are, wherever they want to be, and provide as much support as we can from a global perspective. So we are continuing, the Hub's a new organization. We just launched this year, and we continue to build to support global developers, global patients, and also global patient advocacy organizations.
Thanks, Amanda. I know that when we think about research, we know that advancements in research don't happen overnight, right? That it takes a lot of time for all of this to work the way that it needs to. And
Yeah.
so with that in mind, how will patients know that the Global Innovation Hub is making a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we will, of course, communicate the progress that we're making at the hub through kind of the typical channels that you hear about the FSHD Society's progress. And so, making sure that you're paying attention to that, whether it's, through newsletters or emails or social media or otherwise, we'll continue to keep you updated. And we also have our own channels for communication, like through LinkedIn. So that's like a direct access to updates. And then, we expect that you'll see that as we continue to support different organizations, that we'll see kind of new players coming out of the woodwork and working on FSHD, or kind of standardization of the way that people are running clinical trials and the type of clinical trial endpoints like we talked about that they're using. And so we expect that kind of all of these different signals will will show the progress that the FSHD Hub's making.
Perfect. Looks like those are all the questions that I have. I don't know, Amanda, if you have any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience, those live and those who will catch our recording later.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So I just want to thank everyone for joining and taking the opportunity to learn more about the hub, and also want to reiterate my thanks to those who are contributing in the many different ways that are available to contribute to support this work. Also, thank you to the FSHD Society for giving me the opportunity to really step into a space that I think is really exciting and kind of first of its kind to support this type of work with the Innovation Hub the way that we've built it. And so all of those, different community members and different folks who had the foresight to put this program together, really, we really have the opportunity to make a lot of impact here, and also to make sure that patients are involved in contributing to that input in a really meaningful way. So thank you for the time, Ashley, and the opportunity.
Thank you, Amanda. We really appreciate you being here and explaining this to our community, and we look forward to seeing all that the FSHD Global Innovation Hub will accomplish. So with that, we will go ahead and end our webinar for today. Thank you, everyone who joined us. We certainly hope that you will join us next time. Our next webinar will be on navigating Medicare for individuals with FSHD, so we hope that you will join us. And with that, I wish you all a good day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.